$412. That is what was left, out of $82,000. 18 years of saving gone. I stared at the screen and called my mother. She picked up and said, "Your sister only gets married once." She said it like that explained everything. Like my future was a reasonable price for an open bar in Bali. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Because this story does not start with a bank account. It starts with a letter that should have changed my life. And a family that made sure it did not. Hey there, if you have ever had someone take the thing you worked hardest for and hand it to someone who did not earn it, stay with me. Subscribe and stick around. This one is going to stay with you. My name is Solene. My sister Darcy is 5 years older than me. She was the kind of daughter who filled a room just by walking into it. Loud laugh. Perfect hair. The one everyone asked about at family gatherings. My father Nolan looked at Darcy the way people look at trophies. Proud. Polished. Something to show the neighbors. I was the other one. The quiet one. The one who got good grades and nobody clapped. My mother Gail had a phrase she used whenever I pushed back on anything. She would say, "Solene, you are our understanding one." That was not a compliment, it was a job description. It meant I was the one who would always bend so nobody else had to. I bent when Darcy got a car, and I got a used laptop. I bent when they flew to Darcy's graduation but watched mine on a phone screen. I bent every single time. But I was building something while I was bending. Every AP class, every extracurricular, every late night at the library, every essay rewritten 4 times. I was not bending toward nothing. I was bending toward MIT. I got in. Early admission. I stood in the kitchen holding the letter and my hands were shaking so hard the paper was vibrating. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. It was real. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology wanted me. Me. The quiet one. Before I continue, I want to know who is here with me right now. What city are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where the story reaches. I showed my parents that evening at dinner. I set the letter in the center of the table like it was a crown. Nolan picked it up, read it, and said, "Well, that is something." Gail smiled and said, "We always knew you were smart." Darcy glanced at it and said, "Cool, is there more chicken?" That was it. No screaming. No champagne, no phone calls to relatives. Darcy's college acceptance 4 years earlier had been a full family event with cake and a group photo. Mine was a 3-word sentence between bites, but I did not need their noise. I had the letter. And I had the fund. My parents had set up an education fund when I was born. It had been growing for 18 years. Gail used to mention it once in a while. She would say that money is for your future, Solene. Do not worry about it. By the time I got accepted, there was just over $82,000 in it, enough for 2 full years of tuition. I had a partial scholarship application pending that could cover the rest. The math was tight, but the math worked. I was going to MIT. 7 weeks later, Darcy announced her engagement. His name was Troy. He was the kind of man who talked about himself in every conversation like he was the main character in a movie nobody else had auditioned for. Darcy loved him the way she loved everything. Loudly and without question. The wedding planning started immediately. Not a small wedding, not a simple wedding. Darcy wanted Bali. She wanted a destination event with imported flowers and a dress that cost more than some people's down payments. And Nolan wanted to give his golden daughter everything she pointed at. I did not think about the fund. It did not cross my mind. Because the fund was mine. It had my name on it. It had been there for 18 years. It was the one thing in that house that belonged to me. I found out on a Tuesday. I had been gathering documents for the financial aid office. I needed a statement from the fund. I logged into the account and there it was. $412. The number I already told you about. The number that rearranged my entire life. I called Gail. She picked up on the 3rd ring and her voice already had that tone. The one she used when she knew she had been caught and was trying to land soft. She told me they had needed the money. She said Darcy's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. She said they would pay it back. She said your father and I discussed it, and we knew you would understand, because you have always been our understanding one. I did not yell. I did not cry. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, and felt something shift inside me. Not break. Shift. Like a door that had been propped open my whole life, quietly clicking shut. I called Nolan next. He was shorter. He said a daughter only gets married once. He said MIT was not going anywhere. He said I could defer a year and reapply. He said, "Stop being dramatic, Solene. It is just money. $82,000, 18 years of growth, my entire future. Just money." Darcy did not call at all. She posted a photo of her venue that evening, with the caption, "Dreams really do come true." She was standing on a terrace overlooking the ocean in a white linen dress holding a glass of champagne. I was sitting in my bedroom doing the math on how many hours I would need to work at minimum wage to replace what they had taken. The math did not work. Not even close. I deferred MIT. I told myself it was temporary. 1 year. I would work, save, reapply for financial aid. But the deferral became a withdrawal when the scholarship window closed. MIT does not wait. The spot went to someone else. And I was left holding an acceptance letter to a school I could no longer attend. The wedding happened in August. Bali. $82,000 of my future converted into flowers, flights, and a beachfront ceremony. Darcy danced barefoot on imported sand. I sat at a table in a dress Gail had picked out and smiled because that was my job. To understand. To bend. Troy gave a toast about destiny. Nolan cried. Gail held my hand and whispered, "Is not this beautiful?" I looked at the flowers that cost more than a semester of tuition and said yes. It is beautiful. That was the last time I bent for them. I moved out 2 weeks later. No announcement, no argument. I packed what I could carry and left a note on the kitchen counter that said I found an apartment. Gail called that night. She said, "Why are you being like this?" I said, "I am not being like anything, I am just leaving." She said, "But the wedding just happened, and we are all still celebrating." I said, "Congratulations," and I hung up. The apartment was a studio above a laundromat. The heat worked when it wanted to. The window faced a parking lot. I had a mattress on the floor and a laptop on a folding table. I worked mornings at a campus copy center and evenings tutoring high school students for the SATs. I ate rice and canned soup, and I did not complain, because complaining requires an audience, and I did not have one. But I had Professor Atchison. He was the one person who changed the direction of everything. He ran an academic mentorship program at the local community college where I had enrolled to keep my credits alive. He was in his 60s, sharp, the kind of man who listened like he was taking notes with his whole body. He read my transcript and looked at me and said, "You should be at MIT." I said, "I know." He said, "So why are you here?" I told him the truth, all of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that rewired how I saw everything. He said the people who lose their chance at an education are not the ones who fail. They are the ones the system was not built to catch. And then he said, "So build a net. Build a net." 2 words. I did not know it yet, but those 2 words were about to become a company, a mission, and the reason 500 people would one day sit in a ballroom and listen to me speak. But that was still years away. First, I had to survive, and surviving meant 1 shift at a time, 1 student at a time, 1 month at a time. Gail texted on my birthday. A single heart emoji. Nolan did not text at all. Darcy posted a honeymoon photo the same day. She was in Santorini. I was eating cereal at my folding table. But here is the thing about being the quiet one. Nobody notices when you start building. And by the time they do, it is already too late to stop it. Build a net. That is what Professor Atchison said. And that is what I did. It started with 1 student, a girl named Maya who sat in the back of my SAT tutoring group and never spoke. After the 3rd session, she stayed behind and told me she had gotten into her top school, but her family could not afford it. She had no idea how to apply for financial aid. She did not know what FAFSA was. She did not know that scholarships existed beyond the ones her high school counselor had taped to a bulletin board that nobody read. I stayed with her for 3 hours that night. We went through every database I could find. We rewrote her personal essay. We filled out 7 applications. 6 weeks later, Maya called me screaming, Full ride. 4 years covered. Her mother got on the phone and could not stop crying. She said, "You changed my daughter's life." I said, "Your daughter changed mine too, she just did not know it yet." That was the night I realized what I was supposed to build. Not a tutoring business. A bridge. For every student who fell into the gap between good enough and funded enough, the gap I fell into, I called it Atchison Grant Consulting. The professor told me I did not have to name it after him. I said I wanted to. He was the only person who had looked at my wreckage and seen a blueprint. The first year was brutal. I worked the copy center mornings, took community college classes afternoons, and built the consulting practice at night. I lived on 4 hours of sleep and the kind of stubborn energy that only comes from having something to prove to people who are not listening. But the students kept coming. Word spread the way it does in communities that do not have resources. One mother told another. One counselor mentioned me to a colleague. A local newspaper ran a small feature about Maya's story and mentioned my name. Within months, I had more clients than I could handle alone. I hired my first employee, a college senior named Priya who had gone through the financial aid system herself and understood every loophole and deadline. Then I hired a second. Then a third. I moved out of the laundromat studio and into a real office. Small. 1 room above a bookstore. But mine. Every square foot of it earned by someone who was not supposed to be here. By the end of the second year, Atchison Grant Consulting had helped over 100 students secure scholarships and financial aid packages, totaling more than $4 million. I was not making a fortune, but I was making a living, and every dollar that came in carried a weight that had nothing to do with money. It carried proof. Proof that the girl whose future was sold for an open bar in Bali had built something that no one could take away. Professor Atchison came to the office one afternoon. He sat in the chair across from my desk and looked around at the files, the thank you cards pinned to the wall, the framed photo of Maya at her graduation. He did not say much. He just nodded the way he nodded when he was proud, but did not want to make it bigger than it needed to be. Then he said something I wrote on a sticky note and kept on my monitor for years. He said, "You did not build a net, you became one." I did not tell my family any of this. Not a word. The last time Gail had texted me was months earlier. She asked if I was coming home for the holidays. I did not respond. Nolan had not reached out at all. And Darcy was busy. But here is where Darcy's story started going the direction everyone except Darcy saw coming. The wedding had been a production. The marriage was not. Troy, the man who toasted destiny at a beachfront ceremony in Bali, turned out to be the kind of man who believed destiny meant other people adjusting to his needs. He quit his job within months. He spent money like it was renewable. Darcy called Gail crying on a Tuesday night, and Gail told her to give it time. Gail always said give it time. That was her answer to everything. Give it time, be understanding, bend. Within a year, Darcy stopped posting couple photos. Within 18 months, she moved back into my parents' house. The divorce was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when there is nothing left to fight over because everything was spent on the wedding. $82,000. For a marriage that did not last 2 years. My entire future traded for a party that fit on an Instagram grid and a husband who left when the champagne stopped flowing. The flowers were dead, the dress was in a closet, the venue had already hosted 100 other weddings, and my MIT acceptance letter was still in the top drawer of my old desk at my parents' house. Expired. Useless. A souvenir from a future that got sold at a discount. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard. I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from watching the thing you predicted happen exactly the way you predicted it and knowing that nobody will connect the dots. Darcy moved home. Gail welcomed her back. Nolan said nothing. The golden child had returned, slightly tarnished, and the family closed ranks around her the way they always did. Nobody called me. Nobody said, "Solene, we made a mistake." Nobody said, "Maybe we should not have spent your college fund on a wedding that lasted 22 months. But life kept moving. My business kept growing. The third year brought something I did not expect. A phone call from the National Education Access Foundation. They were hosting their annual gala, a fundraiser for first-generation college students. 500 guests, major donors, university presidents. And they wanted a keynote speaker. They wanted me. The woman on the phone said they had followed my work. She said Atchison Grant Consulting had become one of the most effective grassroots scholarship organizations in the region. She said the numbers spoke for themselves. Over 200 students. More than $9 million in secured funding. She said my story, the personal one, was exactly the kind of story their audience needed to hear. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The same way I had once said yes to Maya. The same way I had said yes to the studio above the laundromat. The same way I had said yes to every terrifying thing that turned out to be exactly right. I hung up and sat at my desk and realized something. I was going to stand on a stage and tell 500 people what my parents did. Not for revenge, not for pity, because somewhere in that audience would be a parent who was about to make the same choice mine did. And somewhere else in that audience would be a student who had already lost, and they needed to hear that losing the fund does not mean losing the future. It just means building the future with different tools. The gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening in November. Black tie, 500 seats, a stage with a podium and a screen behind it, my name on the program. My face in the invitation. And here is where it gets complicated. Because 3 weeks before the gala, Gail called. For the first time in almost a year. Her voice was different. Softer. She said, Solene, I know we have not talked in a while. She said she had seen something. A newsletter from the Education Access Foundation. It had arrived in the mail because Nolan donated to them years ago. A small amount. Tax purposes. His name was still on the list. She said, I saw your name. She said, I did not know you were doing this. I was quiet. She said, your father saw it too. I was still quiet. She said, we would like to come. If you will let us. I sat at my desk for a long time after that call. I looked at the thank you cards on the wall. I looked at Maya's graduation photo. I looked at the sticky note from Professor Atchison. You did not build a net. You became one. I picked up the phone and called Gail back. I said, you can come. I will leave 2 tickets at the door. But I want you to understand something. What you are going to hear on that stage is the truth. All of it. And I am not going to soften it. She was quiet. Then she said, I understand. 3 weeks later I stood backstage in a black dress I had bought with my own money. I could hear the room filling up. 500 chairs. 500 strangers. And somewhere in that room, 2 seats with my parents, names on them. The lights dimmed. Someone said my name. And I walked out onto the stage. The ballroom was full. 500 people in chairs arranged in curved rows around a stage, candles on every table, a screen behind the podium showing a slideshow of students. Their faces. Their acceptance letters, their graduation photos. 214 students whose futures had been rebuilt by a company that started in a studio above a laundromat. I stood at the podium and looked out at the room. I found them in the 7th row. Nolan in a dark suit. Gail in a dress I had never seen before. They were sitting next to each other, with their hands in their laps, and their faces locked in the careful expression of people who do not know what is coming, but can feel it approaching. I took a breath, and I began. I told them about the letter, the MIT acceptance, the kitchen, the shaking hands. I told them about the fund, $82,000. 18 years. Gone in a conversation I was not part of. I told them what my mother said. Your sister only gets married once. What my father said. Stop being dramatic. It is just money. I watched the room shift. 500 people leaning forward. Doing the same math I did that night in my bedroom. I looked at the 7th row. Gail had her hand over her mouth. Nolan was staring at the table. Not at me, at the table. Like he could not lift his eyes. I told them about the studio above the laundromat, the mattress on the floor. Professor Atchison and the 2 words that changed everything. Build a net. I told them about Maya, the girl who got a full ride because someone sat with her for 3 hours. I told them about $9 million in secured funding, and 214 students whose futures were rebuilt by someone whose own future had been sold for a wedding. I paused. I looked at the 7th row one more time. Nolan had finally lifted his eyes. He was looking at me, and I saw something on his face I had never seen before. Not pride, not yet. Something that comes before pride. Recognition. Like he was seeing me for the first time. Like the daughter he thought was being dramatic about just money was standing on a stage in front of 500 people, and the math suddenly looked very different from up here. I said one more thing before I stepped away from the podium. I said, I want to be clear about something. I did not build this company to prove my family wrong. I built it because someone took my future and I had to build a new one. And along the way, I realized that the new one was bigger than the original. Not because MIT would not have been extraordinary, it would have been. But because the thing I built instead does not just change my life, it changes lives I will never meet. And that is worth more than any fund. That is worth more than any wedding. That is worth more than any version of me my family thought I was supposed to be. I stepped back from the podium. The room stood up, 500 people on their feet. I did not look at the 7th row. I looked at the screen behind me. 214 faces. 214 futures. That was my MIT, right there on that screen. After the speech, there was a reception. People kept coming up to me, shaking my hand, telling me their stories. A dean wanted to partner with my organization. A foundation director handed me her card. A woman my mother's age held both my hands and said I had a daughter like you. I did not listen. I wish I had. I saw Gail before she reached me. She was walking through the crowd with that careful walk she has when she is trying not to fall apart in public. She stopped in front of me. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. She said, I did not know. She said it twice. I did not know, Soline. I said, you knew they took the money. You knew I deferred. You knew I moved out. You knew I stopped calling. You had every piece, Mom. You just never put them together, because putting them together would have meant admitting that what you did was wrong. And you do not do that. You say give it time. You say be understanding. You say your sister only gets married once. But you never say I am sorry. She stood there, tears on her face. She did not say I am sorry. Not even then. She said I want to fix this. I said you cannot fix it. The fund is gone. MIT is gone. What you can do is stop pretending it did not matter. Because it mattered. It was my whole life, and you gave it away for a party that lasted one night. Gail nodded. She could not speak. She reached for my hand and I let her hold it for a moment. Not because I had forgiven her, because she was my mother. And some things are more complicated than forgiveness. Nolan found me outside. I was standing on the terrace alone. The air was cold. He walked up and stood next to me the way men like Nolan stand next to things they have broken. Close enough to show up, not close enough to touch. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, that was a lot of people in there. I said, yes. He said, they all stood up. I said, yes. He said, I did not know you built all that. I said, I know you did not. He was quiet again. Then he said, I should not have called it just money. I waited. He said, I should not have said a lot of things. I said, no, you should not have, Gibel. He looked at me. He opened his mouth, and for a second I thought he was going to say it. The word. The only word that mattered. But he could not get there. Not yet. He closed his mouth and looked back at the parking lot. That was Nolan. A man who could build anything except an apology. But he stayed. He stood on that terrace with me for 15 minutes, and he did not leave. He did not make excuses. He did not bring up Darcy. He just stood there. And for a man who had never stood still for me before, that was something. I drove home that night. Alone. The city was quiet. I pulled into my parking spot at the apartment I had moved into the year before. Not the laundromat studio. A real place. 1 bedroom. A kitchen with a window. A desk where I built something that mattered. I sat in the car for a minute. Not because I was sad. Because I was trying to remember the last time I had sat in a car alone at night, feeling something heavy. It was the night after Thanksgiving. Years ago. The night my father laughed at the table and I drove home and sat in my van in the parking lot wondering if I should keep going. I kept going. That was the answer then. It is the answer now. Darcy never called after the gala. I do not know if Gail told her. I do not know if she read the article that came out the following week. I do not know if she connected the dots between the fund and the wedding and the sister she stopped thinking about the moment she got what she wanted. I do not know. And I have stopped needing to. Gail calls now. Not often. but real calls. She asks about the business. She asks about the students. She does not say be understanding anymore. She is learning a new language. It is slow, but she is trying. Nolan has not called, but Gail told me he read the article. She said he sat at the kitchen table with it open on his phone, and he did not move for a long time. She said she asked him if he was okay, and he said, I think I owe her more than I know how to give. That is not an apology. But it is the closest thing to one that a man like Nolan knows how to build, and for now I will let it stand. The MIT acceptance letter is still in the top drawer of my old desk at my parents' house. I never went back for it. I do not need it. Because the thing I built without MIT is bigger than anything I would have built with it. Not because MIT does not matter, it does. But because when someone takes your plan, the plan you build in its place sometimes turns out to be the one you were meant to follow all along. Every child deserves a funded future. Not just the loud ones. Not just the golden ones. Every single one. That is what I tell my students. That is what I tell myself. And that is what I will keep building until the gap does not exist anymore. If your family ever chose someone else's moment over your future, I want to hear about it. Did you find another way? Did you build your own net? Drop your story in the comments. You might be the reason someone decides to keep going tonight. And one more thing. Who is the Professor Atchison in your life? The person who looked at your wreckage and saw a blueprint. They deserve to be on this stage too. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe. We have more coming. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.